Okay, well, greetings, everybody. Once again, it is 9 a.m. in California, and at the moment it is midnight in Yogyakarta, where we are fortunate to be joined by LA-based artist Shinique Smith and Yogyakarta-based artist Mella Jaarsma today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the conversation between these two extremely thoughtful artists who work in a variety of media. Both artists are painters, both artists are sculptors, both artists are installation artists. They've worked with performance, they've worked with ideas of embodiment and of ritual and a lot of really deep, thoughtful ideas about practice that I've been privy to in the last couple of days as I've been talking with these two wonderful artists. And so I'm very excited to introduce them to you today. Um, I want to point out too that we are in a situation now because of Zoom and COVID, where we are presenting through Baik Art is currently presenting as Bake and Nicer, I believe, a booth with Shinique Smith at Art Jakarta. And so this is actually a program of Art Jakarta that's, of course, happening at midnight in Indonesia. But we are very excited to be hosted in this way and to be able to participate from this distance. So um, we're kind of thinking about Mella today as being our host, welcoming us to the virtual world of Indonesia and the art world of Indonesia as well. So thank you so much, Mella, for being our host today. So I'll start by introducing you. Mella Jaarsma is a Dutch-born artist who has lived in in Indonesia since the mid 1980s. Is that correct?
That's
So
right.
right. So what is that? Oh my God, I can't even do math.
More than half my life.
35 years now that you've been in
Yes,
Indonesia,
something
is that
like
right?
that.
Yes.
Yes.
And with her partner, Dinditio Adipronomo, she is the co-founder of Semiti Art House, which is a very important artist-run space for contemporary art. The first such space in Indonesia, which continues to support a community of locally based artists and art workers. So we're very pleased that you could join us today. Mela, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Shinique Smith is an artist based in Los Angeles who was born in Baltimore, Maryland. And she has been exhibited in a number of really prominent and excellent collections and institutions. Her work is in the permanent collections or has been exhibited by the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and various different MOCAs, MoMA PS1, the Whitney Museum, Studio Museum of Harlem, and she has exhibited internationally. She's done a number of major installations as well as collaborative works with communities that she's going to talk with us about today. And she's someone I've had the pleasure of knowing since we were working together when she did a residency at the Headlands Center for the Arts back in, I think it was 2008, when I was
Seven.
2007. Wow, when I was the program director there. So it's really great to work with you again, Shanique, in this capacity and to welcome you to this series of talks. We're really pleased that you could be here. And we're excited to see how your two different experiences as artists working on other sides of the globe might converge as well as diverge through our conversation today. So, what I'm going to do is ask some questions, but also hope that you will not turn to me to prompt you with questions because I think we are starting to develop a rich conversation between the two of you and your practices that we're lucky to be able to present to a broader audience today. The first question that I want to start with, because I think it's so central to the way that both of you work, is if you would please talk about your materials. Specifically, how do you select materials? And what are the politics that you consider as being either inherent in the materials you use, right? What are the politics of the materials you use is my question. But that could be kind of baked into the material itself. It could be how you get them. And that'll sort of lead into my second question. But could you begin with what do you use to make your work and why?
To who do you ask? To me first, or
Sure, go ahead.
okay? Yeah, for me, material choice is very important because I believe that the choice of material brings forward the content of the work. So I started in the end of the 90s to make my first costumes, and the first work I made was made out of frog skins. And this was very important work in the sense that the frog skins I used also related to the shape of the costume and on the situation at that moment. There were many riots going on, and especially the Chinese society in Indonesia are always sort of the black sheep or the black goat, how you call them. And yeah, so there was a lot of violence against them during the last weeks under Suharto. And yeah, so I did a performance on the street frying frog legs and opened a discussion with the people on the street about the situation of the Chinese in Indonesia, and also how that situation related to the colonial past, which I'm also part of that. I'm Dutch. Indonesia was colonized by the Dutch for a long time. So since then, the material became a very important part. So for example, this is made out of squirrel skins. I collected the squirrel skins from the farmers living close to Yogyakarta in Java. And these are seen as a pest, so they are killed by the farmers. And then I was invited for a project in Bangkok. And there I brought those the killed squirrels I brought to the center of Bangkok in this park, and I threw them around the trees, and to show the contrast as well, because in the trees there are the living squirrels, and people in the city, they come to feed the squirrels. They love the squirrels. So this work is called From Pest to Pets, and it very much relates on the context. So you can be hated on one place and loved on another place. So it also relates to people.
When you're using the animal images, I mean the bodies of animals,
Yeah.
how is that a commentary on the political situation? Can you talk to that a little bit more directly?
Yeah, I think it sort of represents, how do you say, cultures. For example, also perceptions towards animals, like especially nowadays, it's so sensitive. But it's also a lot of hypocrisy, like, yeah, from who are we as humans to decide which animals we're going to kill and to eat and to change into shoes, for example, and other animals we have to protect. So yeah, there's also a lot of, I can see a lot of hypocrisy in that sense as well. But on the other hand, I think it's very important to be sensitive and see where do you stand? Especially living in Indonesia, the material culture is very much related to natural materials. So I'm doing a lot of research on that. So this is a work made out of cobra and water snake skins. They are also killed by the farmers because they're in the rice fields. So I made this costume out of it. So yeah, it's called I Fry You. So they became one series with the squirrel skins as well.
I wanted to ask you a question, Mella. How are you choosing the models to wear these costumes, these skins? Is that relative to what you're talking about colonialism and the statement that you're trying to make?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's important, and because many works also relate to certain maybe cultures or certain communities. So the people then that I invite then to wear the costumes relate to those ideas. So for example, this one is a work, the photographs on the back are made out of photographs of people in Papua. It's a province in the East Indonesia. And then I translated it into sort of fashion costumes and worn by
Can we go back to that?
Yeah, to the skinny Japanese girls. Also to show perceptions towards the body. So to be a bit bulky in Papua is not a problem, but in Java you have different perceptions toward the body. So I like to create that contrast and question also this kind of issues. And then I think so related to the body, related to also the context and the situation. I like to travel a lot and also to observe. So a lot of indigenous culture. I learn a lot of that. So many of my ideas, they also come out from that, and then also relate them to the current situation. Or yeah, relate also, of course, yeah, what I told you about the colonial situation, because the colonial past is still part of the present, of course. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Sorry, I got lost.
Yeah. I thought that's really interesting. And it's really interesting to me the connections that we have between materials and the body. For me, my materials, I choose materials that are most directly in line with me. There's movement and fluidity that I like to work with in the pieces that I make. I guess that's part of my process is fluid. So I choose materials that have fluid, flexible nature. I use a lot of water-based materials, acrylic, ink. I started to make my own ink this past year using residues of coffee grinds and red cabbage juice and
Nice.
things like that, and sometimes dyes now, because the hand is also important to my work. So whatever flows as an extension of my hand is what I choose to go forth with. And we both use fabric and textiles. And for me, that, my materials are kind of low tech to a certain degree and very basic to human nature and the human gesture. So human production, I'm intrigued by the patterns that we make, the clothing that we make, which is beautiful on one hand. And on the other hand, there's an overproduction of these goods globally. Overproduction, overconsumption is an issue, and that's part of the politics of the material and some of my other works where I've created bales, hand-tied bales of clothing and fabrics. And it also relates to what we have and what we don't have, the things that we take for granted. And there's a kind of or an imagined or unseen connection between people. People who created these objects, manufactured them, where they were manufactured, them where they're sold, who wears them, who gives them away, and who resells them. Sometimes the cycle, the life of a shirt starts, maybe in Indonesia, maybe in Mexico, maybe in India, maybe Korea, and comes here to the US and is worn and consumed and then gifted with an altruistic notion that this is going to help people who are less fortunate than me. And it does to a certain degree, and it gets resold and then shipped back overseas, where there are cultures that wear our used clothing, and sometimes those are the cultures where the clothing was manufactured. So that's a strange connection between people that is gross and gluttonous, and also I try to glean the poetry out of it. There's some sort of beauty in how we're connected by what makes us feel like we belong and don't. And then there's the history of pattern and the fact that it can exist as color. It functions as a symbol, and it also functions compositionally as color and pattern, and how those patterns for centuries have been traded and exchanged by travel. All of that is really intriguing to me. And I guess in my work, I try to collapse all the different chaos of the world into, these picture planes. and objects contain it, balance it.
Yeah. But some of the works that you work with textile, you sort of make it very compact, so it almost becomes like a cubus of textile that you bind together. So yeah, it looks like things that can be sent to other places or can be dismantled and then be used for different things. So I think it's interesting how you also transfer the textile into some other thing, so it becomes very compact as an object sometimes. Like here, you bind it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
I've looked a lot at the way that nomadic people, whether that be due to housing insecurity and experiencing homelessness, or my forced immigration or chosen migration, how we package our things
Yeah.
to
Yeah, it's
carry
also
all that
very
we
typical Asia
own.
to bind things together with textile and carry
Right.
them.
I mean, I've looked a lot at that, and I have source images, and I'm right now in downtown Los Angeles, where there are blocks and blocks of people who are living on the street and carrying everything that they own with them. But the thing about that is, too, at the beginning of my career, there are a lot of people, and actually, one of my friends keeps saying this to me over and over again for like 15 years. Shinique, you should take a shopping cart and fill it with your bundles. And the thing about me is I feel uncomfortable mimicking that, because it feels to me kind of exploitive to make something that is directly related to this person experiencing this thing, or taking that thing of theirs and putting it in a gallery and saying, this is art. I mean, it is art, but I also feel it's a strange relationship. So I've really tried to be influenced without duplicating, if, and have it still come back to me in my hands, and also balance that with other influences.
So that kind of, you already covered the question that I had next about labor and exchange and the systems that your work reveals. I mean, it's already come out, which is wonderful. So I'm going to change the question a little bit. And what I want to ask you is, how do you work with people? You both work with people in these different ways. And so, for example, Shanique, I saw in one of these slides that there's a sculptural installation where there appears to be a performer, like a dancer, doing a pose in the middle, hanging. I have to figure out which one it is. I think it's this one. Oh, there she is, right? So there, that's one kind of working with people. Mella, you've worked with people in a lot of ways in your work. So would you mind speaking to that? Maybe Shanique, you could start with this piece.
Okay. Well, I've created some performances that I've collaborated with dancers and who have the skill that I don't have, like aerial feet. This is Tempest Holstead, who is an amazing aerialist in Jacksonville, Florida. And I had the honor of working with her. And I had a vision. This piece has multiple bundles hanging in space. I guess I've been exploring, like we were talking about, containing and then unraveling. And she embodied those aspects of the gesture of making and I guess being a bundle in the sky. And so I have worked with some dancers in that way. I have a vision. I create costumes. I didn't create the jumpsuit for this. I created everything that's underneath. There's some painted tights and things under. But I also have made costumes, I guess. I've made textiles out of my work, which have textiles in them. So there's this kind of, folding in, mirroring of things that goes on. So I've adorned the dancers with costumes, and then we've collaborated on choreography that refers to the making of my work. also, I've worked with people in terms of kids in schools. I've done a bunch of public projects where I've done workshops or coordinated workshops for kids. One of the murals that's up here from Philadelphia, from Mural Arts, we did, part of the program was that I did some creative workshops for kids that were in the justice system, that were, you know, low minimum security incarceration. Anyway, that's not incarceration. Sorry, it's early. I've done a lot of projects with kids and different people. And one of the other pieces here is also an exchange. It was called Donation Center, that my show here at California African Art Museum a couple of years ago talked a lot about displacement, and one of the pieces served as a donation center. I used the material budget the museum gave me, and I seeded it with personal care items and invited the audience of museum goers to bring donations. We had a workshop where we bundled them, and then they were given out at a community day, but mostly by hand between me and a couple of friends to people out here. And with the materials, the exchange, one of the things I didn't mention before is that I collect from people their belongings, and mostly people that I know, or friends of friends of friends. So there is this other personal exchange that's going on. I don't know if I answered the question. I felt like I went off on a tangent, but sorry.
I think it's very clear. Thank you. Very interesting. Yeah, I also work a lot with people. Yeah, I think some overlappings with your work also. That work also start from the connection with the people. I make a lot of works also related to certain communities. Yeah, for example, this work I made for the Sutochi Triennale last year. I was on a very small island in Phuket, it's called, and I work with a very old community. Mostly, yeah, these are some of the teachers were there, but most of the people who live on that island are above 70 and 80. So I looked into the material culture on that island, and they're all fishermen previously, and yeah, they created a small shrine, but they always brought on the boat to save their lives. And this small shrine, I translated into costumes made out of rattan, and then it were performed by the inhabitants. So yeah, I like this idea that you go somewhere, you get your inspiration, and then give it back to work with the community. For example, also the women there helped me to create those kimonos or the tops, and then also do the performance with the inhabitants in that place and make the creative work really for them actually. I did a sort of same thing in Thailand a year before. There's other images. Can you scroll? Yeah, further. In
Wow.
Thailand, it was also interesting. Also situation also related to fishermen and seaside. But there I met a small batik factory, and very similar process of creating batiks as in Indonesia. And I got very interesting story from the women that they were forced in the 30s, her family, to throw their batik stamps into the river because they had to modernize. So it was no longer good to wear batik, so they were really forced to throw away.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got their stamps back. The family dived into the river in the night to rescue the stamps. So we created a batik with those old stamps, and then I also created those costumes with those batiks and hang them on the fishing rods, and the costumes go into the water. So if you want to see the costume, you had to, yeah, this work, you had to take it out to see the work. And of course, it was quite quickly in a few, 2 months or 1.5 months, it was already really destroyed. But it was also part of the work. So So I really
Wow.
like to see the situations, and then also it's always interesting to think as well because it's part of a biennale or a triennale. So you have like the international crowd coming in, but in the same time you have all the locals facing the work every day and also sort of becoming part of the work because they're there to explain the work to the other visitors and so on. So I really like to work with local communities and create a work related on their stories, on their memories, on their past. So yeah, for me, this kind of projects are the most, how you say that, they're most successful in this sense that you give something and you leave something there. Instead of bringing your inspiration to your studio to work on something and then show it somewhere else, I really like this kind of projects and where you inspire by a certain spot and then leave the work there as well.
I'm interested in how you describe your collaborators as being your audience as well. And perhaps in certain situations, even people that you're paying to fabricate materials, would they also be an audience for the work, and how?
Um, yes, like in Yogyakarta, I work a lot with people who have certain specific skills because I think as an artist, we don't have every skill we can. So I work a lot with artisan and to have the conversation with the artisan also is a lot of give me also a lot of inspiration. There's a lot of exchange, so they learn from me and I learn from them. And there are some works also just appear through this conversation, and I think that's very important as well. So for example, this image is a very different story, but it's about barcloth and how Indonesians relate to barcloth. It was before made also for the first writings, for example the Al-Quran, the first writing was also on the barcloth, but also they made costumes or clothing out of it. So at least since 4,000 years is what people know. So I created those costumes and I go back to one of the very, yeah, say old places in the middle of Sulawesi, one of the islands in Indonesia, to bring back those costumes and make this series of photographs. And then I also found a small community who's still making the barcloth. So I made a documentary about those women. So yeah, I'm very much inspired by this kind of things that, small different worlds existing at the same time and how you can connect those different ideas and different realities actually, and how to appreciate those different realities as well.
Janique, you've also worked with bark cloth, or you mentioned that you had some experience with that. Could you talk about that a little?
Oh, I mean, I haven't so much in my own work. I have some familial ties to Fiji and there it's called tapa cloth. It's a bark cloth, and
Where are they from?
I've seen. I'm sorry.
Where do they come from, this barcloth, do you know?
What plant?
Fiji.
Oh, Fiji.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
oh, Fiji. I don't know the tree name.
No, but
I
I
don't
mean
know
the
the tree.
yeah, just the area I wanted to know. So
The
it's Fiji.
south. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, the
Fiji.
tapa. Yeah.
And I've learned how to make it.
Mm.
In visits to the village in Taveuni, and have made some with women in the village. I haven't used it in my work per se. I've thought about using it as a surface here and there. I guess I didn't at first. It goes back to, for me, what I was saying before about bringing. I didn't want to mimic or bring in um, the things from people who are experiencing homelessness into the work. So I didn't feel comfortable then doing just using it as a straight background or but I feel now that I could maybe incorporate portions of it into the greater whole because the whole brings in the rest of the world and it's not focused solely on that. But I love, there each family has, it's kind of like kilts in a way.
Yeah.
In Fiji, each family has their own pattern, and create skirts out of them, out of the cloth by folding to create pleats. Um, and then there's also a weave that happens in New Zealand and in Fiji. That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Maybe in the future, I don't know. If I guess right now I get a lot of what I make isn't made for the project. That's one difference that Mella and I have, is things I'm using are already created at some point, and I'm bringing them into the work and creating, transforming it into another shape.
Yes, yes.
One thing I wanted to ask Mella about handicraft and sewing and textiles and costumes, I guess it's a twofold question. I'm sorry, Anu, is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I had wondered, because with women, and not to, be so gender specific, but, when you grow up, so when you grow up with people who work with textiles, let's say, that usually there's someone who's a woman in their past that sewed, a grandmother, quilt maker, and that influenced the work. And for me, my mom did fashion design when I was a kid, and she was a fashion editor of a magazine, and she made these gorgeous creations that I was around fabric and crochet, even though I don't crochet. And maybe that's part of why I can sew, but I don't. So, but I'm inevitably drawn to that and influenced by that. So I was wondering, in your past, if you also had that kind of connection, and also how some Dutch handicrafts may have influenced your work, and if there are projects about that.
I don't have directly a person. Maybe my grandmother, she really liked to knit. So she always, every winter, knitted another jumper for us. But my mother, she really hated to sew and she didn't want to do it. So my father was the sewer at home. If we had to need some restorations or things like that. So we had the old Singer sewing machine. He was using that one. But I think it's just because I really like to work with my hands and to create. So when I was in school, I really always, learned how the different techniques. And then also in my free time at home, I always created things. And I also like to create my own work, my own clothes since I was 10. So I used the machine of my father to create my first, I don't know, bags I made, dresses, and so on. So yeah, it's just to be busy and to work with your hands and appreciation for skill. I think that's so important. And because of that, I think also to use with the different materials, you get a feeling with that. And then also what I still use as an idea as well is that each material has specific logics. So you just follow the logics of the material that you hold and that you work with. So also when I work with those leather, with the different animal skins, the way how you put them together, it always appears when you touch this material and when you start making it. So often on forehand, I don't know what to do, but once you have the thing, and then it just sort of, it has a logic in which you know what form it becomes, starting from the material. And I think it's also interesting to see, for example, when you have your sculptures and how you make this into the bundles, you said. So the forms also just appear out from the when you start. You hold the stuff and you start creating, So I think this is very important. The handling of how you call the handling? No, how you treat the material and how you put it together and how you create. So it's very interesting to
it's
see.
true.
And I think also if you make the combination with your drawings and your paintings, you see the same sort of attitude, So on forehand, you never know what's going to end. So you just start and you let it grow. And I think this is very very interesting and very important in the creative process, you know. So you let it, yeah, it develops by itself somehow. And this is also a
Yeah,
very important process of creating art, I think. Yeah, this is also
yeah.
beautiful.
It's important. It's an important part of the process. I love that you conceive that relationship, because for me, the choice of sculpture to painting to performance to installation is also a fluid exchange, which, the paintings influence the sculpture and vice versa. And I do approach them similarly, with an intuitive mind. I have thoughts and ideas at the start, and then it unfolds as I'm
Exactly.
going. Because I like to experience a feeling of discovery, because I don't know what's going to happen at the end. It's always different than I set out, and I give myself, like I said, that flexibility to so that it's an experience for myself, and perhaps it's imbued with that sense for the viewer.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is also interesting. Like if you have like the drawings and the paintings, that's also why I always go back to this process of drawing and painting, because something happens in those processes that you cannot get in any other thing. If you create the three-dimensional, it's just a very different process in that sense. It's connected, but I mean the directness that you experience through drawings and paintings and how ideas come out of that, yeah, I think is very important. And I can
Yes,
also
me
see that in
too.
your work. Yeah. So from a
It's
drawing, it goes
essential.
into an installation, it goes to in performance, you know. So yeah, interesting to see
Exactly.
how how
Me
the
too. I
process.
think it's cool.
Yeah, I mean, that was the next question that I had for you, was around why to move between these different forms. But when you were speaking to Mella, you made me think of a quote that I always like to cite from Annie Albers, where I read that she had been interested originally when she joined the Bauhaus in going into the stained glass studio. And unfortunately, because of unacknowledged sexism in the Bauhaus, she was refused entry into the stained glass studio and pushed instead into textiles, which was where all of the women who had been admitted to the Bauhaus somehow ended up. And at first, this was, felt like a slight. And what she said later on was that it was a gift, because textiles force you to work with what you have, whereas painting really allows you to do anything. And in her case, she felt like there were times when having constraints imposed by the material had a.
Yeah.
So maybe just to ask this question that you've both spoken to already in a different way, what's the benefit of working with painting versus working with found materials, for example? What does each one allow you to do that the other does not?
I use my drawing especially to develop ideas, because not all my ideas start from, for example, from the material. So sometimes if I'm in between projects, then I just start drawing, and then so to shape the idea. So I see making my drawings more like creating maquettes or something, like small imaginations of how things will be in a bigger proportion or in a different setting, you know. So just to sort of try out. And then mostly my paintings appear after I created already the three-dimensional. So it's sort of another reflection on what I've been doing in say in the real proportion. Or and that's also what I like with the painting, because then you can, yeah, I always work then with a real proportion and a lot of, yeah, human figures in it, but it's like yeah, this reflection of the people standing in front of a canvas or in standing in front of an object, and how are you situated in the space, and the physical appearance is very important. So to bridge your ideas on a very direct way through installation with the audience is very important. And but then, yeah, sort of still the drawings and the paintings. Yeah, I think it's more also like the paintings. I do it also because I like the process, and because from the painting I get new ideas.
I too use drawing in the same way. I feel like when I come back to drawing every time, it's just always interwoven in the practice. It's how I learned how to make sculpture, because I didn't study sculpture. I draw how to make the sculpture, and then I learn how to tie and put things together. All my ideas coming out in drawings and writings. It's like a visual diary. So drawing is kind of just like a direct, catalog of thought. And for me, painting versus found objects, found objects are finite. Paint isn't. Paint has unlimited possibility. And for me, I have unlimited kind of use of what I put in and the amount of gesture sometimes, but then I come back and I edit, and the picture frame, the edge, that boundary is really important for me to react to and to contain and balance energy.
Yeah,
and
because
the same with
the strokes and the how far you can reach out, and
right.
It's
sometimes
all
it goes beyond the edge, and then that's the possibility of where it could lead to, but it's always reacting to the edge. And with installation, it's the same. Site specific space, I'm responding to space. Whether it's macro, micro, small, handheld, or large, I'm responding to space in the same way, and in the edge and the container, which also very fun. And I like paintings too because of their relationship to the body on the wall. For me, it's like a mirror. It's like a two-sided mirror where you see me and the viewer sees me, and I kind of imagine the viewer and where the eye will go. And so that's why it's still there. and found objects, they're found objects that are finite, and they have some possibilities but not infinite. And performance is a whole nother ball of wax.
Great. Well, we'll go right into that then. So the question, which is my last question for you, I'm going to fold it in with a question from Alana Mann, who's in our audience today. And her question was if you could speak a little more in detail about what happened in the performances that you showed us, each of you, because they're quite fascinating. But I think we could speak to that in the context of this question, which is how does ritual manifest in your works? So Shinique, since you brought up performance, maybe we could start. Actually, I was interested in maybe starting with the performance that you did solo that resulted in artwork, which is the painting that you made with your body, the one that's called Twilight.
Oh.
And Chris, maybe we could find that image. It's the one of the installation in blue on the wall where you see Shinique in the middle looking very delighted, I think, after she made her piece.
All the way back.
Yeah, we'll go backward. And in the meantime, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, and then how does ritual manifest?
I'll talk a little bit about ritual. I mean, ritual is different from habit, and I think it's often confused. And ritual is a conscious act that, for me, hones thought, focuses energy, balances. And I use repetition as a form of ritual, and also, writing. The calligraphic gesture is language based, that can't be read. So I create my own sort of mantras or phrases bits of song lyrics, bits of poetry, and there's a ritual within writing and within creating ink or using the brush. Within tying, how to tie, that these are ways of focusing energy into an object, right? And so ritual for me is within the gestures in the making. I started with the piece prior to this one in the slideshow using my body to create gestures. That's me putting my boob on the wall and using it as another element. Can you go forward, Chris?
Even in that
Thank
last
you.
one, the one before it, I remember we talked about that piece, No Thief to Blame, and you put your shoes in it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I've used my own clothes, but then I used my body. And for this piece, I wanted to create a catalog of blue and gesture. So in some ways, it's kind of taking the equine and blowing it beyond, and I'm in control of my body. And the gestures I'm using or catalog of gestures, there's, a animageta moment, there's, a kind of frolicking, there's punch marks, there's all these kind of cliche gestures that are associated with being a woman, my butt's everywhere, but I also didn't want it to be so precious, like, oh, here's this beautiful body mark, I used it as another tool, as another brush, and added it with fabric and collage. So it's performative, but it wasn't performed in public. And this image of me afterwards isn't like widely circulating as a piece of art. But there are other things that I've done where I've, like I said earlier, collaborated with dancers. And if you go to the first image of my section, Chris, I started to apply the same gesture that, that if you go forward one, thank you, to my body that I was applying to the sculpture. I wanted to see, it was a very innocent thought, what it was like to be inside one. Not realizing at the time what the visual product would be at the end and how many different connotations it may, different relationships that could evoke to bondage, to all kinds of situations that, and then more recently, I performed this live. I hadn't performed this gesture in public, and I created a ritual around it. That's the last image in my section where I've been bleaching denim. I like to work with denim. I'm drawn to indigo and cotton, and no, 53, back one. Thank you. And I like to use breath. I've sampled myself doing different types of breathing that are typically used for yoga or meditation, and remixed it into music that was incorporated for the dance performances. So this performance, we're performing breaths live. I used women who taught yoga. This is in Baltimore at the Baltimore Museum of Art earlier this year. And I wrapped myself in these cloths that I made, bound myself in these braids. And the audience was invited to approach me and given small handheld bundles to create offerings. Basically, I embody all the restriction and subjugation and whatever other things that have been put upon us as brown people, Black women, and then it's released. at the end, and it's something that's experienced publicly. But we have a clip if we have time. But for me, this was it's cathartic as an act, because it's a different experience for me as the performer to be bound than it is for other people to witness it. Because for me, it's an out of body kind of experience. It seems like it wouldn't be, but you go completely in. Excuse me. Sorry, we'll pass it along. But it was important also to perform it in Baltimore and in other places that have been sites of institutional violence, and try to evolve and transform those feelings into something else.
Yeah, very interesting. Very different than how I use performance. I hardly move, or there's hardly any movement in my performances. So very little ritual, but I use ritual more as an inspiration base. So because there's so many rituals in Indonesia related to the traditional culture, which is also still a nowadays culture. So for example, the square body, can you go to the white dress and
The next one.
the next one, I think. Yeah, this one. So this work is inspired by idea that especially in Bali, when you are pregnant and 6 months, that the baby inside the belly is already surrounded by 4 brothers. That's the belief in Bali. And those 4 brothers, those 4 entities, they grow with you during your life until you pass away. So they're sort of your protectors. So I translated them into this dress with those 4 figures. And then so I just asked this man, this performer, to move slowly through the space. So he creates the shadows, small and big, by moving. So it's just very, very, minimal actually. So yeah, I think ritual is very important. It's part of our life. It's part of our specific moments and concentration on some specific things related to our existence, I think. And so I just try to translate it into a performance, or I call it more like a settings actually. Sometimes it's also more like an activation of my costumes instead of a performance. And then like especially with this becomes more a performance because they are moving slowly. And then also, but it's not only about the performance, it's more about existence and being there, and you as an public or a viewer standing there, and what happens to you. So I think it's always important to create sort of settings. I see it more like settings where small things happen and where you get something out of that.
What was going on in the one performance? I think it's slide number 9. With the red.
One? Oh, this one?
Yeah.
And it's called Dog Walk. So I created 12 costumes out of sacred animals. So these are slaughtered. Those animals are slaughtered during the Muslim Korban, it's called. So these are the sheep, the cows, and the goats. And I use those the skins and the feet as well to translate it into these costumes. And yeah, it's a sort of persiflage towards the dog walk as well, to the catwalk as well. So yeah, I created videos with the models working through the mud with cows, and then also with more in an urban setting with dogs. And then when it's exhibited in exhibition space, the people are leasing up to each other instead of to the animals. So it's also again related to the power structures, where we can never get rid of those systems in society where one is sort of exploiting the other and is above the other, and one is leading the other, one is following. So yeah, this performance is about that. And then also our relation with animals. So what I told before, like, yeah, why do we, for example, say that this animal is sacred and another and other cultures, yeah, sometimes we have to offer those animals, we have to kill them in other areas or other cultures. We have to protect those animals. So I think it's always interesting to show these different perspectives, and then to think, where are we standing and what are we thinking actually, and what is our relation. So it also started actually also with the ritual of the slaughter, what we have to experience every year in Indonesia.
And what I love about that project, this image especially, is this idea that I think what you've just expressed is how we as humans, whether we protect and preserve the sacred animal or whether we ritually slaughter it, we retain this position of power that says we have the right to decide, and it's our job to treat them some way. And what I love about this is how you very subtly put these different ways of relating to the animal together, but you take the human being and all of their authority and put them in like a little bit lower position on the hierarchy in that way, a more equal position with the animals. I think that's really interesting. And I think that's
it's
also
more like to question it instead of creating a solution or my personal opinion, for example.
Yeah.
So,
And I also think that it's really important here because in some of the performances you showed us, you work with performers who are overwhelmingly Indonesian, dark-skinned people who were local to the community. But in this one, I see that there's a wide variety of more European types of people and more Indonesian types of people. And I imagine probably most people are mixed. But I also think that makes this particular image and performance so poignant because it's about eliminating hierarchies of all kinds.
exactly. Yeah, it's true. That's right. Yeah. Thank you for your.
I thank you both for this wonderful conversation. It's been so rich. We do have a few minutes if folks would like to offer any questions from the audience. You're welcome to do so in the chat or the Q&A. So please do let us know if you do have questions. Also, Shinique mentioned that she has a video of the breathing room performance, which we would be happy to show you in the last few minutes here. So we'll give it a minute for folks to ask questions. If we have some questions, of course, I'd be happy to share them and we'll respond to them. If we don't have any questions, then I think we will close. And we'll close with a screening of that short performance video. So Chris, I know you have the link. If you share the video, would you be so kind as to check the bottom of your share window and make sure you also share the sound so that we can hear the breathing score as part of that. That's the one technical note. I don't see any questions. And since it is 10 o'clock, I think let's go ahead to the video. Thank you all so much for being here today. Mella and Shinique, thank you so much for being here with us and giving us your time and your generous insights. It's been wonderful to spend time with both of you and your work. And congratulations to everyone in Indonesia who is able to see Shinique's work at Art Jakarta. I wish I could.
Can do online. It's all online, eh?
Yeah.
It's all virtual.
That's the best part of this era, isn't it?
Exactly.
Some of it is behind me, so it's not in Jakarta. But thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Thank you so much, Baik Art.
Great. Hope to meet in real.
Yes, soon.
Indeed. Friends all over the world are good to have. Thank you so much. And Mel, we'll get to sleep now. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll close out with a short video from Shinique.